believe in God.
Every description of God that I've heard holds God to be all-powerful, very typical, and all good. And I see earthquakes and tornadoes and disease, childhood leukemia, and I see all of this and I say, I do not see evidence of both of those being true simultaneously. If there is a God, the God is either not all-powerful or not all good.
There he is, the face and voice of Neil deGrasse Tyson, astrophysicist, and incredibly popular these days. If you're on TikTok or Facebook, there's stuff popping up all the time. As I said, very, very popular man. G'day and welcome to episode 11 of this live podcast of an atheist, a believer, and a pastor walk into a bar. I'm your host, Peter Ray. We're talking about cults tonight. What are they? Why do they exist? What religions are considered cults? And why are there elements of Christianity that are cult-like, or, in fact, are they a full-on cult? Depending on who you talk to, you'll get a different answer to that. Some claim they are. There are certain things that all cults seem to share. We'll take a look at them and try to uncover what makes a cult. If you've never checked out our podcast, you're either watching us live or recorded, whenever that is, on YouTube or Facebook. There are plenty of 20 to 30-second shorts as well that have kind of a gathering, I guess, of the last 10 episodes. You can see them on TikTok, Spotify, and Instagram. Check them out if you don't mind. It's a great way to introduce to your friends what exactly we are doing. We're not sure sometimes. If you are watching live on this 28th day of February 2024 at 8 p.m. Australian Western Standard Time, we've set it up so you can reach us by typing a question on your YouTube or Facebook screen. We'll be able to see it and we'll hopefully be able to interact with you. We would love you to make a comment. Give us your opinion on cults or anything that's on your mind regarding faith and or God. Now, I was a believer. For those of you who have just joined us and who don't know how this all came about, I was a Christian for over 25 years. I'm no longer one now. If you want to know, this is something I spoke to Rich about, might have been this week. If you want to know what that feels like getting out of a belief system like that, think of a religion that you do not believe in one little bit, and nothing could convince you to accept it. That's what Christianity means to me now, if you want to know what that feels like. That's just no part of it that I can accept as being real or true. I have no evidence from an empirical perspective that could possibly change my mind. But hey, if God is real and he wants to show me he is, bring it on. I am open. So yes, I am the atheist on this podcast. Once I had decided, along with my wife, to stop going to church, I started to feel free of the guilt. I started to listen to famous atheists like Christopher Hitchens, Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, and Matt Dillahunty. And they basically all confirmed that I was on the right track to discovering something else. In the red corner tonight, gloves on, are my two co-hosts who are both fervent believers. Luke Feeney is a Bible teacher and sometime pastor, and the other is a long-time believer, Richard Stalls. Evening, gentlemen. How you doing?
G'day, Peter.
G'day, Peter.
Our other regular guest, Suresh Rajan, is currently in his hometown of Bangalore in India. He'll be back with us next Wednesday. Looking forward to that. So, guys, I thought we'd kick off with the definition of a cult. It is a term in most contexts pejorative, meaning, of course, contempt or disapproval, for a relatively small group which is typically led by a charismatic and self-appointed leader who tightly controls its members, requiring unwavering devotion to a set of beliefs and practices which are considered deviant in some cases in normal society. This term is used for a religious movement or other social group which is defined by its unusual religious, spiritual, or philosophical beliefs and rituals. That's the line from the definition of what a cult is that kind of grabs just about every Christian or a religious group you can think of, defined by its unusual religious, spiritual, and philosophical beliefs and rituals. Now, depending on whether you're a believer or not, you could apply all of those things. We'll look at that. So as you can see, you can find it quite easy to categorize Christianity in some ways, it's a cult-like organization when you consider it's very much a religion of sacrifices and blood rituals. So let me just get a little bit of reaction from you guys on that definition of cult, and we're going to expand it a little bit and talk about those religions who are considered by everyone to be cults, and then we'll we'll unravel it as we go along. Gentlemen, what do you think?
Look, I'm just still reeling from the from you calling Christianity a religion based on blood sacrifice and what was the other one?
Rituals.
And rituals. Yeah.
Why does that not fit in? It's
probably not how I would define it, but there's elements of that, I guess. I can see where you would draw that inference from, but I wouldn't say it's a religion based on that. But I think.
So yeah, that was a wrong choice of words on my part. No, I didn't mean it's based on that. I mean, historically, if you go back and have a look at the rituals and the sacrifices and the atonements and stuff like that, it is very much a part of it. It's not necessarily based upon that. That was a clumsy word for me to use there. So I understand why you're outraged.
No, oh, mate, far from it. You're yet to outrage me, Peter. I'm waiting for that day. You don't like it too much. That's the problem.
Thanks, mate.
No, look, I think I think we're going to have to keep referring back to that. To keep the definition of a cult in mind is going to be important for this conversation, I think, and also a recognition that what we understand as a cult today is probably different to what it was initially. That I guess
absolutely
origin of what that word was. It's definitely morphed into something a little bit different. And it's also notoriously hard to define. Like none of this is in defense of I guess my side of the thing, but I think it's important that we understand it is very difficult to define what a cult is, which makes this conversation even better, I believe, because we can identify. You got your out and out extreme cults that you go, look, there's no denying that. And then you've got organizations that are very clearly not cults. But then there's this massive gray area in between with certain factions or groups or organizations, some of them potentially quite big, that operate in that space. And I think the biggest part in thinking for me about this conversation has been wanting to identify some of the elements where, even if there are, say, churches or organizations where, okay, they're not an out and out cult, well, what practices are still being employed that border on that, that are unhealthy, that are potentially toxic, that a cult may take to the extreme, but it's still cult-like behavior. And so I think that'd be a good thing that I'd like to explore as well, because it's not a black or white thing, really. I mean, that's a pretty open and shut discussion. And
that's precisely what Rich. That's precisely what Rich and I were talking about. How halfway through looking at doing this for tonight, I thought this is just too. It's so grey, as you say. There are elements, which I said in my intro, elements of which have crept into, probably unfairly, into some religions, Christianity being one of them. But that's what's happened over a long period of time. Every aspect of it changes and grows, and what was a definitive term now seems to be very, very grey. So I'm with you on that, Luke. I almost thought about scrapping it and not going ahead, but I think it's an important topic. Rich, what do you think?
Yeah, look, there's a classical definition of the word cult, which is more around like ritualistic religious behavior. That's sort of how it started as a technical term. Most people today use cult in a pejorative term, as you're saying, and they tend to think when we talk about cults as a more of the extreme groups, So that, on one end we've got, cults. We can easily point to them. There's a heap of Netflix series on it that are quite interesting about that. But then, as Luke was talking, there are cult-like behaviors, cult-like characteristics. You may not be a full-blown cult. That doesn't mean you're home scot-free. You can not be a cult but have a lot of cult-like behaviors. But on the other end, I think what we don't want to do is, and which no real expert that I've read on the cults, because it's been a fascination for me for most of my life. Cults. No real expert on the cults would define organized religion as such as a cult. There might be cult-like behavior. So, for instance, mainstream Anglican church, the grannies sitting there, sing a few hymns, pass the peace, take communion, have a cup of tea and go home. That's not a cult. You may, otherwise the term cult loses all of its actual meaning. If cult just means religion, you're not saying anything new when you use the word cult. So we've got to make sure that, religion doesn't get off scot-free when we're talking about cult-like behavior, but it's not necessarily just religion. And there's another term that I guess a lot of the experts tend to use. One of the ones I do read a bit. He published a book called Unsafe Sects, SECTS, and I thought that was actually a great name for a book, because you might get a whole bunch of sales for people not knowing actually what they were buying. But unsafe sects. So that's sort of where some people would really think about that middle piece. They're not cults. They're not that really sort of quote unquote safe mainstream religion, but they're sort of in between. And so that's a sect. That's like a smaller offshoot of a religion. So, for instance, the Pentecostal church would, be classified as a sect because it sort of broke away from Catholicism, Protestant churches, and sort of have a little subgroup. But that doesn't make them dangerous until they start exhibiting those cult-like behaviors, and then you're sort of classifying them maybe not as a cult, but certainly as an unsafe sect if they're doing that. A lot of other people, another term there is they use the term like cults and high control groups, because that tends to be the one where that tipping point is that control factor. So there's quite a sort of a grey sort of scale in there, but certainly there's a lot of things that have helped me think about faith, belief, religious experience, especially middle piece about unsafe places, high control places, or cult-like behaviors, without necessarily having to brand everybody with a cult brush, because it may be true, but it doesn't help, if you know what I mean.
No, I think we're all in agreement with that. Let me ask you both then, what came first? Was it religion's
the chicken
desire to be more cult-like, or was it just that it was always a potentially going to be a part of something which could be identified, sharing with those extreme kind of cults? Because it's difficult for a lot of people. I mean, if you look at the mainstream cults that we're all familiar with, the Mormons and a lot of people know them, the Church of Jesus Christ and Latter-day Saints, of course, Jehovah's Witnesses, or the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, as we know them of, Church of Scientology. There's a whole pile of the main 10 main cults in Australia, in America rather, including United. What's that noise?
That's my dog coughing. He's 13. He's probably on his last legs, and
oh God,
he's going to go to heaven soon.
My wife is currently in the background giving him about 49 different medications.
That sounds like Lou did our monthly trip to the vets, because we've got two 13-year-old dogs, and $1,000 later, and this is a regular occurrence every couple of weeks. Having old dogs is a very expensive pastime, but they're well and truly worth it.
They are. Oh, absolutely. So,
interestingly, Rich, number 10, the top cult churches or groups in America, is the United Pentecostal Church, which, as you were saying, is a break off. Some of them are extreme. I mean, the Church of Scientology. I mean, my goodness, that's the quintessential cult, isn't it? And if you're a member, apologies if you're offended by that. But hey,
Tom Cruise could be watching this. It's potential.
well, Tom's a fan, so
you might have lost him forever as a viewer thanks to that, Peter.
well, we still got John Travolta, so everything's okay there.
We'll
But
take
yeah,
that.
so let me go back to the question: when do you think, as far as there was a clear difference between extremism, Waco? There's a whole bunch of other ones I can't think off the top of my head. Just did crazy things at the expense of gullible people who got taken along for a ride in cults. But when do you think it moved over and became recognised as something to be concerned about, as far as modern religion goes, Christianity in particular?
John, can I jump in there?
Go for it.
It's not often my brain is activated to actually have an answer off the top of my head, so I want to make the most of it.
I'm impressed.
It may never happen again, so let's roll with this. I
You got the rest of the night, mate. It's all yours.
that you might regret saying that. I think the fact that it is an ancient faith, Christianity, and in its origins, and I'm talking, I guess, from that time of Jesus, and the way that it was modeled, that early church, it was almost the opposite of a cult. There wasn't one charismatic leader. There was ambiguity. Yes. Yeah. And this was pre-Bible. Remember that. There was letters and there was authoritative pieces of scripture and letters and things like that were going around. But it wasn't, there wasn't this book that had fallen from heaven that was like, here is exactly how we are going to do this. And this is in and this is out. All of that. That's why they had to go through the process of trying to develop a lot of that and figure all that stuff out. So it was quite a radical faith, quite a radical, I guess, religion in the sense that we would refer to it today. But because of that ambiguity, because of that area, that space to play with, as time has gone on, we have that has built and it has grown, and we have what we would determine as an orthodox belief. There are creeds and there are things that the majority would stick to, but if you actually look at those things like the Apostles' Creed and some of these, the Nicene Creed, some of these things that were ancient orthodox statements, again, there's a lot of room to play in that. There is a lot of space outside of it. It's very much what it says. Here are some really core fundamentals, and outside of that, explore what that looks like with the Holy Spirit and things like that. So whenever you have that, and that is specifically built as the opposite of control, as the opposite of hoarding power, as the opposite of trying to create something with a very specific agenda and intention, you're going to get offshoots like that. And that's what we have, 30-odd thousand different denominations now. Not all of those are cults, nowhere near it. But in that space, over time, you're going to get these spaces that open up, that start to exhibit this cult-like behavior. And the majority of those, even those ones that are exhibiting this sort of behavior, the leaders of these organizations, they're not your Jim Jones and your Charles Manson and these guys who are intentionally misleading people per se, although you may still get some of that sort of stuff. But the majority of it, it's simply that human nature to want the truth, to want to think you have the truth, to be able to control people, and ultimately to retain power. And the sad fact is that you can, religious motivation is a very, very powerful and very, very strong motivation, because you're dealing with people's beliefs. You're tapping into something far deeper than often logic, often rationale, things like this. So to say you're the mouthpiece of God, or to say this is how you are to interpret the Bible, and therefore this is what the Bible says, and wouldn't you know it, it happens to fit my agenda of what I want this community to look like, you're going to get that happen. So I think Christianity itself is out and out not a cult. Without it doesn't fit the definition. It's certainly not. But within that, there are certainly spaces that have taken that ambiguity and they have manipulated it to serve an agenda. It may not have started out that way, but at some point it's turned into that. I'm talking within those organizations themselves. Most of them would be started with the best intentions, but all of a sudden you're going to start to do something, or you happen to like how it feels to be the guy in charge, or whatever it is, and that's what we end up with. But I think the target then needs to be on that sort of behavior and that sort of way of reading the Bible, or that understanding of God and faith and Jesus. That's probably what needs to then be addressed, rather than the entire faith of Christianity.
I think the sticking point for me, Luke, is that in the definition that I read out, cult defined by its unusual religious, spiritual, or philosophical beliefs and rituals. If you're not a believer, all of those things apply. So I know you're saying Christianity, bang, not a cult. That would be an understandable thing to say as a believer. But if you're not a believer, all of those things apply.
I think
religious, spiritual, or philosophical beliefs and rituals, everything in that, to me, is absolutely 100% true. They are all weird to me and strange and cult-like.
But the key word in that sentence, that part of the definition, and when we're dealing with definitions, every word does matter. They're very, very well thought out, is unusual. And to use the word unusual religious beliefs indicates that there must be a usual religious belief. Even if the person who wrote that definition doesn't subscribe to those, it's saying there are usual religious beliefs, but a cult will operate outside of that. They will distort those usual beliefs so that they become unusual. So I don't think it's, because you can't define something when referring to a belief, because exactly what you're saying. If you don't believe it, that definition means nothing, because everything is unusual. So it has to have a counterpoint in that usual religious belief. That would be the way I would read it.
But I could take that one step further, because I have been in that situation. So if you've never been there, it doesn't really matter. If you're in it, you're going to have a different opinion as well. For myself, having seen it as none of those things, then to be able to step out and view them without the persuasion of experience or being in it at the time, that statement, defined by its unusual religious, spiritual, or philosophical beliefs and rituals, that fits to me perfectly. Now, I'm not trying to apply the cult term to Christianity. It doesn't bother me either way. Cults, by and large, are, a negative existence. I mean, they don't bring an awful lot to the table. They're violent. They're illegal in many, many ways. They don't offer a lot to society. Christianity, I think, gives people hope, as does the cult gives people hope. That's why they're involved in it. But from my perspective, having been in it and then coming out of it, I can read that, and that sits very, very easy to me. This term is also used for new religious movement or other social groups which, defined by its unusual religious, spiritual, or philosophical beliefs and rituals. The one question I also have on top of that is, what is a new religious movement? When does a new religious movement become a new religious movement? When is it no longer a new religious movement? And who are they referring to?
Yeah.
Is that definition of cult?
See, I think that's why people are trying to find some new terms or talking about in a wider way, because some definitions basically lump anything that's not materialist atheism as a cult, well, then the word cult actually loses its meaning. If it means
Yeah.
the exact same thing as religion, then there's no point having cult
Exactly.
and religion talking about the same thing. You just talk about religion, because
Mm.
we know religion can be safe, it can be unsafe, it can be quite good for society and quite damaging for society. So that cult label has to be useful when it's talking about that edge, where you're talking about high control, where you're talking about certain characteristics of a religion. And that's why I think a lot of people are talking about unsafe sects, unsafe groups, damaging groups that have high control, especially since a lot of cult experts recognize that cults don't just come in the spiritual flavor. They're the ones that work quite well. But like you go onto Netflix, there's a whole bunch of non-spiritual cults. There's self-help cults, that sort of psychological space. There's even quite strong political cults. One of the experts that I've been reading a bit through, she's got involved in a sort of a extreme left-wing Leninist religious political cult. So it's not so much the content of the beliefs, it's really how they function. But then if it's even more so, it's like behaviors that surround it. For instance, I've been visiting a lovely little Anglican church down the road on Sundays. Bunch of old ladies, old men, young families, sing a bunch of hymns, hear quite a nice affirming, humanity affirming homily, and then you have the Eucharist. There's no control. There's none of the stuff of that in it, and you couldn't call this church a cult.
No,
It's a group, any more than the local footy club is a cult. They've got their own rituals and songs and behaviors, but even instead of communion, you drink your, well, depends which football club it is, but if it's over in Queensland, your 4X, you've got your rituals. Every group has it. You really now there's other markers that really come into play, and that's not to not deny, Peter. There are some quote unquote church groups, some that I've personally been involved in, that I wouldn't call a full-blown cult, but I would absolutely say they had very strong cult-like behaviors that were not safe for people to be involved in. And so, yeah, I think instead of, if we throw the cult word at every single religion out there, it's sort of like, okay, I don't know what you're saying, but if we can use it as a term that actually means something quite particular, that we can start talking about these groups.
yeah, we knew it was going to be a balancing act. And I think one word to me that stands out, which is defining a true cult, which is the word control.
Yeah, I think you're right there, Peter.
I think that if there's no degree of control, there are other elements you can apply and you can make it stick and whatever. I think the intent of a group of people, Scientology, for instance, I mean, that is just a fictitious, crazy story. Although many people say, if you think that's crazy, how come you believe in all of the stuff from the Bible? And that's another great argument for another time. But it is to a lot of people crazy. But it's all about money for them. It's about getting money out of people, and it's not a coincidence that a lot of their the big stars of Hollywood are in there. I don't know for what reason, and I'm not about to go and ask them, because they get very, very nasty when you start questioning them, and they have a great history of violence against people who have tried to perpetrate the group to try and learn more about it. But I think the word control, and I'm not even sure, and I'm asking the question, playing devil's advocate, of asking the question of, do we really need to even highlight and go after those groups who have decided to perhaps adopt some attitudes from cults and thinking that could perhaps help them. And I guess I'm alluding, for instance, to the televangelism. I mean, televangelists. Now that's let me put it out to you, gentlemen. Do you consider televangelists cultic at all?
Oh yeah, I certainly see that. It's funny because one of the traditional marks of a cult is a bit of secrecy. You know, they have a certain face they put on, like, you know, they're happy and they're shiny, but you get a bit deeper and there's a bit of a dark undercurrent, and that's sort of the plot of every single Netflix cult documentary. I don't see that so much in the televangelists, but they do have cult-like behaviors. I think for me, the big problem with that mob is that it is the religion of unbridled capitalism. For one thing, it's not Christianity whatsoever. It is false and despicable to turn the message of Christianity into something like some sort of quick get rich quick scheme, but they prey on vulnerable, and that's that cult-like behavior, control. You know, I've heard them say things like, you know, you better give me I need 1,000 people to give me $1,000, otherwise something terrible is going to happen to you. It's like some cheesy chainmail letter. All of that is cult-like behavior. So yeah, I wouldn't classify them as a cult, but you know, they've certainly got a whole bunch of stuff going on.
Well, if you look at the control element, certainly there's very much control, and it's bribery. I mean, if you give 10% or give me X amount of dollars, God's going to repay you in tenfold. Just baloney. Go on. Sorry, Luke.
No, I was going to say, I agree with Rich in the absolutely exploitative behavior, and exploitative behavior is definitely a hallmark of a cult, but the control side of things, although I agree there is an element of control, that's a manipulation, a spiritual type manipulation there, and that will control an element. But because of the channel of televangelism being so wide, and you know, you don't have access to these guys. It's like this is, except through the TV. So they are unable to exert a level of control over the majority of people. They may be exploiting those people, but not necessarily controlling, their everyday lives. You know, who they associate with. Clearly, part of their message and all that sort of stuff can affect people's behavior. But I think the level of control when we're talking about a cult is often seen more in those brick and mortar places where there's actually a leader up the front, and there's a community that's sort of very much devoted to this man of God or woman of God who has all the answers. Even if those televangelists pitch themselves like that, which they do, I am the mouthpiece of God and send me your money sort of stuff, because of that public channel, they're unable to really exert that enough control over the people to a degree that I think would classify them as a cult. Because I think with cults, you kind of do have to tick a number of boxes. It's like when you're diagnosing someone with a psychiatric illness, you know, they may exhibit 3 out of the 7 behaviors, but the criteria means they have to actually tick 5 of those or 6 of those in order to be diagnosed with that. I think it's a similar sort of thing with cults, but televangelism definitely needs to be called out. It sounds almost counterintuitive, but often the most damaging ones are those smaller actual brick and mortar type communities where there is access to the leader per se.
Well, it's also easy to control a small amount of people, isn't it? But let's look at that word control and see what it actually means in the context of what we're talking about, because at the end of the day, it's clever manipulation, and that's the one characteristic of the dangerous cults in history that have small groups who have done incredibly damaging things to a group of faithful people. They've manipulated those people into believing that they are somehow powerful, connected to God, appointed, all of those things. That kind of manipulation is very similar. I was wondering how far we could connect it to televangelism for starters. I mean, that is very much manipulating people and controlling them that way to get what they want out of it. So that's the kind of leadership that we're talking about, selfish ambition at the expense of the people that they're manipulating. And I'm thinking about, and this is going to be a difficult one for you, Luke, because I'm going to bring pastors into that category, not in the purely as a not as a controlling thing, but as it's hard to put into words, but some people do feel controlled by the leaders. They're called leaders. They're appointed as leaders, and there is always going to be abuse of that. So is that fair to say that that's something that can happen in a lot of churches, or is it just the odd preacher or pastor or leader that abuses that power and authority? And is that then similar to that of a cult?
I think there's well, it's both. It is the odd leader or pastor that takes it to that level of abusing it, some to disgusting and terrifying degrees. But even those that don't, the way that system is, that temptation is always there, which isn't really just a religious thing or a Christian thing. I think anybody in any form of leadership has that
of course, yeah,
temptation to get filled with their own importance and dehumanize or take away the dignity of someone below them, which is a horrible thing. And the heartbreaking thing for me is when you see that in the church, because the way that was modeled by Jesus was very clear. And there's a lot of stuff that Jesus wasn't clear about, but leadership was not one of them. It was he modeled it in so many ways, and the ultimate display of what it is to lead was him washing the feet of his disciples, which sounds crazy to us now and sounded even crazier to them then. That was an absolutely radical display, a counterintuitive display of what it is to lead. And the whole point of that was it is to serve. Even the Greek word, it's all about, it's shepherding. It's you are to shepherd people. It is to come alongside people and help them, not lord it over them. Jesus even says, you don't lord it over them like the others do, like the Romans do, and because that's what leadership looked like, and it's no different today. So there's very specific intent on Jesus's part to say leadership has to look different in the church, and it is about loving and supporting and coming alongside, and not lording it over people. It's power from below, not power from above, which sounds counterintuitive, but a lot of the stuff that Jesus said sounded counterintuitive. That's the way of the kingdom, if you're a believer like I am. The main thing that we get wrong, and many pastors do, is over the years we've built up this idea of authority in the church that I think has probably gone to quite an unhealthy level. Honoring someone and people we all honor our bosses and stuff like that. That's not really a problem. But when it's taken to a degree of this is the man of God or this is the woman of God, and they're the ones with the answers, and they're the ones who God has appointed and put into this position, and they're called for this, and I'm not called, and so therefore I've got to humble myself to them. It's like, no, that's not what authority is. That's not what honor is. This is not how it's supposed to be. To revere this person just because they stand up on a platform. The hard thing is, if you're the one standing on that platform, even if you don't believe it, when you have hundreds of people that are treating you like that, something happens to us as human beings, and it's very hard. How many celebrity pastors have we seen fall? And yes, they've made those decisions, and yes, it is horrible. But when you're treated like a celebrity, at some point you're going to act like a celebrity, and that's the hard thing, because the church has we've created this celebrity culture, and that's almost become like the greater influence, the greater platform, the greater celebrity, the more campuses, the bigger your congregation, well, the more God is on your side, the more you are anointed, the more you are a man or woman of God. And what's the logical conclusion of that? The more people are going to listen to you, the more you're going to be revered, the less contact you're going to have. And next thing you know, you're Carl Lentz and you're choppering in and not speaking to anyone to walk out on a stage, and then you go, wow, we've missed a point here. So I think, and control, I believe, is the logical extension from that. It's not usually, I wouldn't imagine, would be intentional most of the time, but when you have that, you don't want to let that go. That would be the natural thing. And so all of a sudden, trying to, the reason that you're having that is because of the numbers in your congregation, how many people are coming. So therefore, you now start to have to be very careful about what people can and can't do in order to protect those numbers or to get more people in, and stuff starts to get diluted to serve the agenda of something a little bit different than what it is that we're actually supposed to be doing. So, I feel for pastors, because it's a very difficult position to be in, and it doesn't start out that way, but it's easy to fall into that trap. But there are things, in saying that, there are things we can do to stop that from happening. And it's actually, when we identify this sort of stuff, we have to start looking at it and go, well, what can we change in the way that we're doing this to prevent this, to stop this becoming a thing, to change some of these dynamics going forward, to avoid this. But it's, that's the hard thing. But Rich will probably have another take as well.
Yeah, look,
Rich, just let me
ahead,
jump in for a second.
mate.
Just remind people to, if they want to be a part of, you are watching, if you've just joined us, an atheist, a believer, and a pastor walk into a bar. We are live at the moment on YouTube and Facebook, and we would love to hear from you. If you've got a question, a thought, if you have an idea or something about the subject we're talking about tonight, which is cults, please give us your two bobs worth. We're open to it. We're just three, chilled out Aussie blokes just wanting to hear from somebody out there. We heard of a chap from Belgium last week, which was quite interesting. So yeah, you should be able to see a little window on the side of where you're watching us on YouTube or Facebook, where you can chuck in a question. We'd love to talk to you, Rich.
Yeah, look, I think one of the things I was hearing from Luke is that there are bad actors. There really are. They get into for all the wrong reasons. But that's not really the problem from my vantage point. I think the system bends things into a certain shape. And, that's actually something I've learned through my studies. Anybody who's done an MBA learns about systems in workplaces. And often, management will look at a situation and go, oh, I know what's going wrong. It's that guy and that girl and that person. Well, it's not. It's the system of the workplace needs to be changed, because you get rid of John, Sue, and Paul. You turf them out, get some 3 people. 2 years later, they're doing the exact same thing, because the system pushes people that way. And there is something very wrong with some of the churches out there. For me, some of the things I've noticed, and I've been in some pretty awful situations with church leaders, a couple of horrific ones actually, not to the point of abuse in a physical sense, but certainly I'd classify it as spiritual abuse. But the systems, like this person with, especially low church Protestant independent kind of churches. This guy with maybe a bachelor's level of education if he's gone to a normal university. Normally, they have a quote unquote bachelor's education from some Bible college, which, to be absolutely frank, is not a bachelor level education. We expect people to go through those things to be able to critically analyze and critically think. That's what that level is, not be indoctrinated in a set of propositions. So they have a very low level of education. They have no sociological training. They have no psychology training. They're not trained in how people relate and how systems work and how to be a good manager and a good leader. And they're not trained in that. And they're thrust into this thing where they're supposed to like somehow lead a community of people. We set these people up to fail. And many of them burn out and act out of that. And that, that's okay. The problem is the ones that become very successful. To become very successful in certain systems, you have to be a bit of in some of the church places I've been in, to be really successful in that, you have to have enough money to look the part. I don't see too many sort of ugly, shabbily dressed celebrity pastors out there. Let's just be true. You don't see. You see the beautiful people at the front, and their lieutenants. I mean, their staff. All the beautiful. Right, and they've got enough money to do that, and they know how to speak the right thing, but what I see is also they've got a power structure to protect, and so questions are shut down. Free thinking is shut down. Not just questioning the belief systems, but what's even worse, questioning the leadership's decisions. Well, that you can't question me because God told me. All of that kind of system in place, it ends up being the most successful people are the ones that run that system really well, and they end up being, in my opinion, damaged by that. If there's a really strong sort of performance system around these poor pastors and senior leaders, Luke mentioned Jesus' style of leadership. If we're doing this in church, surely the Jesus style of leadership should be there. Whether this is compelling to people outside, but inside it should be. We should do it how Jesus washed people's feet, but we've turned that into like a performance in some churches. It's like nice and clean. Make sure your feet are clean because the pastor's going to wash your feet. The equivalent would be, hey, pastor, before you do this thing, could you just come and clean all the dunnies for us? Thanks. Okay, good. In fact, the baby needs to change. Could you sort that out? That's the level. It was the dirty servant work. I don't see too much of systems built around the leaders doing the dirty servant work. So I think we're setting them up to fail. We're setting them up to be these things that are very hard.
And I think to piggyback off that is...
Oh, sorry, Luke. Sorry, before you do, I just wanted to jump in because I actually missed a question before at 8:15, and I think it's my brother.
It looks like your brother, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, there's trees in his profile thing there. So, hi, Greg. Sorry, I didn't forget you. I didn't have my comments section open, which I didn't see it. And he says, I think you would find it difficult to argue that any organized religion is not a cult. And I concur, mate. I really do share that. I can understand why you would come to that conclusion. So your poor old dog there, Luke. God, look.
Well, we
are live and we are unedited. So yeah, Greg's saying I think it would find it difficult to argue that the organised religion is not a cult. So
I sympathise with him.
Sorry?
So I sympathise with him. I don't agree with him, but I sort of definitely agree with the sentiment. That's for sure.
Oh, look, and perception is reality to a lot of people. I mean, it's hard to argue with what appears to be. It's what you see and what you hear about what's going on in the world.
Yeah, for sure.
You derive your opinion from that, and it's very different when you're inside.
Mm-hmm.
It's very different when you're outside, having been inside. Then it's also very different if you've never been in anything other than. And I don't know, Greg, whether he calls himself an atheist. I know he does believe in a spiritual realm. We haven't spoken much about that, but thank you, Greg. I appreciate that. If anyone else has got a comment or a question, please feel free. We what is it? It's 9 o'clock now. It's Australian Western Standard Time. So we've got around about now the 35 minutes left if you want to jump online and say something. So sorry, Luke.
No, not a worry. I was just going to piggyback off Rich and just say, a couple of things on that. I think one is when we treat a church. Did those balloons just come up? How'd that happen?
I don't know.
What did I do? I've got it's the Mac doing it. Blame Apple. I think when we treat churches as companies, well, to successfully run and grow a company, you need to be a CEO, and you need to run it the way a CEO would run it, and that works in secular organizations, and that's fine. That's okay. That's how these things work. But they're operating on a different level. The goal is growth. The goal is profit. The goal is what it is, right? And it's very explicit. The problem is when we run a church with the same sort of goals, then you're going to run it with a CEO type mindset in the guise of a pastor, which that they have to be, that they are in two intrinsically different styles of leadership.
That's good.
Realistically, the goals should be different as well. Growth inherently is not a bad thing, right? And as growth happens, that's great. If your church is growing, amen. That's not a problem. But when growth becomes the total goal, because that is the only metric of success that we're able to kind of operate on, then you have to run that a different way. You've got to run it in a way that works and will achieve that. But that's not always the right way to do it. That's often not washing feet. Often that's not shepherding your core group because you don't have time to do that because you're focused on building something else. And also, I wanted to clarify that I think we're talking here about the concerns, and you do see it in a lot of spaces, but that doesn't mean to say that there aren't some unbelievable churches and unbelievable pastors and leaders who are doing this. They may wrestle with the same stuff, the same temptations, the same, all of these sort of things, and that's okay. There is nothing wrong with that. But the way that they do it is exactly how it should be done. And they're these beautiful, thriving little communities that are making the neighborhood a better place. And these do exist. They don't get any airtime. You don't see these guys in the news because it's nothing exciting. They're just quietly doing the work of Jesus, and that's that. We see this when people fall. We see, you don't see these guys in the news because it's nothing exciting. They're just quietly doing the work of Jesus, and that's that.
Is that just
we see this when people see, you don't see these guys in the news because.
Yeah, I just muted you. I think do you have a the Facebook or? That's weird. See if you've got any other windows. Yeah, I just muted you. I think do you have a the Facebook? I'm going to mute you till you can find it.
This happened to me last time, and I had a YouTube thing open, but it's not me. I don't have anything open at all.
That's I've got him muted because it's sort of feeding back there. You're good. When you're ready, just turn it back on, man.
I was just doing that for dramatic effect. I wanted it's like the word of God from Mount Sinai with like.
That's what it was.
You've always got to be the center of attention, Luke. Just calm down,
I was just going to say that word, the word of God sounded suspiciously like your voice, but I'm just saying.
I don't know why it started happening. that browser's been open in the background for like the entire time. Anyway,
there is a comment for you, Luke, from Ellie Cottrell. Hey, Luke, Is the church system broken, or are we just seeing imperfect people failing at keeping to the system?
Oh, that's a really good question from Eli Cottrell. He sounds like a good guy. This guy.
Eli, sorry, I thought it was Ellie.
Yeah, because
No,
you've got an Ellie.
Looks like an Eli. Yeah, he. I do know Eli, and he is a sensational human being. I love him very, very dearly. So that question. So I can't see my screen because my phone, my camera is in the way. But I'm just having a look.
I'll read it out again for you, Luke. It says, "Hey, Luke, handshake emoji. Is the church system broken, or are we just seeing imperfect people failing at keeping to the system?" So basically, is it the church system that's broken, or is it people that's broken, or is it maybe a bit of both?
I think all of the above. I think there is no perfect system. We can't systematize the church. We can and we need to for in certain elements, right? There are things that we need to do. Otherwise, it's a free for all, right? So systems actually aren't the problem most of the time. But man creates systems. We create systems, and we do that in order to bring some sort of order, to bring a bit of a framework around what it is that we're trying to achieve. We do that with everything, and the church is no exception. Even in the Bible, we see communities trying to do this and getting it right and getting it wrong, and Paul having to go to them and saying, oh, no, not that, not this. So we're always going to have systems that are breaking and some that are broken. But the whole thing isn't broken. It's not like we throw out the idea or the concept of church or gathering, but we can't be so married to that idea and link some of these systems that we've created with the person of Jesus and with the will of God, even if that's what we've been taught by some people around, well, this is the way God designed it and this is how we have to do things. It's not always. But when we have those so tightly intertwined, we are unable to then tweak. We're unable to prune off the bits of the system that is broken, and we're unable to actually objectively reassess and go, is this helpful or is this harmful? But more to the point, is this achieving the original goal of what we're trying to do? Is this actually fulfilling the role of what the church is, or has this morphed into something else? And the real courageous people and churches will actually, it'll be an ongoing process of looking at that and changing and shifting and saying, what's broken? We need to fix that. What's breaking? Why is it breaking? Is it because this thing isn't working, or is it because we don't have the right people that are doing it? Or, okay, maybe it's one or the other and we can fix it there. But there is that element of imperfect people being unable to kind of do this. We're always going to fall into the trap of these certain things. But we should actually have these systems in place to allow for that. Things like accountability, things like having these, questioning. The biggest and most damaging thing that we can do, and this actually ties into what Eli was asking, is when we have cultures that effectively outlaw all questions of real questions of faith, but also questions of leadership, of the system, of how things are working, of how things are operating, because we're afraid of changes or what that might mean. We're shooting ourselves in the foot, because we're literally painting ourselves into a corner, and then we're then unable to change anything to our own detriment, or usually not to our own detriment, but to the detriment of most of the people and the benefit of a select elite few at the top. And the only other word for that is empire. But this isn't every church. But I think we need the courage to be able to look at that and really assess these sorts of things. Because, the modern church is not the same as the ancient church either. Not to say the ancient church is how it should be done, because like everything, we grow, we learn, we figure out better ways of doing things, and that's a good thing. It's not like we have to go back to Acts and this is how it is. But it's also easy to fall into that assumption that the way we're doing things now, the model of the Sunday worship church, megachurch model, or any of the modern church models, is how it's always been done, and that's not the case. So, yeah, that should give us a bit of freedom in being able to assess and go, hey, we actually can change this.
Thanks for your question, Eli. I do desperately need to drag this back to what we're actually supposed to be talking about tonight. We seem to have lost our way, but that's what happens when you get questions. I mean, they need to be, I think they need to be looked at. I want to point out the actual, I guess, the people behind some of the great cults of the world, including Joseph Smith. Yeah, he was very clever. I find these people amazingly clever, how they can talk people into believing that he's right and everyone else is wrong. Charles Taze is the other one, of course, Jehovah's Witnesses. So what I want to try and drill down on these people, Joseph Smith, for instance, he started a very subtle deception in 1830, aggressively evangelistic group. It contends that it is the only true church and that all Christians outside Mormonism are following a deficient gospel and a false Christ. Now, it's hard to, let's say, for instance, that he's just a man who tried to convince everyone the same way that perhaps other leaders have, including Jesus. How, unless Jesus is true, that could also be seen as a cult leader. No different, surely, than Joseph Smith, who may be delusional and actually thought that he was there representing God and whatever, and same with Charles Taze. What's the difference, do you think, between Joseph Smith convincing people that he was replacing a false Christ and Charles Taze, who did a similar thing? How are they different, do you see? I mean, obviously, from your perspective, you see Jesus as being different, but I'm just trying to drill down on the people
that's a good
who...
question, actually.
Well, I don't think they are seen as being evil, although they are a cult. And it's about control with him. But you could paint a picture that he's just another leader.
There's a couple of things that spring to mind. There's a lot of similarities. I mean, it's not a given that they're different. We need to drill down. I think one of the significant differences for me is that Jesus didn't actually establish an organization. He literally came, prophetically critiqued the Roman Empire and the church, the religious leaders of the time. He actually came in and said, he called them some pretty nasty names, actually. Basically, shorthand, you're dragging, you're causing yourself to be a son of hell and you're dragging everybody there with you. They killed him for it. And it was the people who were, I guess, enraptured by the message and the actions of Jesus that ended up creating a sort of a worldwide organization or organizations out of that. So there's a little bit of difference. He didn't establish stuff himself. But for instance, a lot of let's pick on Paul Joe Smith, the start of Mormonism or the Latter-day Saints. Jesus was very well situated in his own cultural religious tradition. But he spoke in a long line of prophets critiquing what was going on. Joseph and was able to actually argue for a lot of sort of progressive sociological, spiritual progression.
Very.
He broke a lot of the inhumane laws that were there. Whereas Joseph Smith claimed that he got an occultic tablet, was able to put some spectacles on and read them and translate them, and there was a history, all of which, we can't say yes or no. He didn't have the tablets. We don't have access to that. However, the history of that thing is proven false. Like there are historical claims in that. It's not like we can't prove them. We can prove that they actually didn't happen. So there's like a class of and a lot of his scriptures are clearly plagiarized from King James Version English Bible verses. So there's a lot of marks of inauthenticity, you know, just speaking quite, and I don't mean to be tearing anybody's faith down here, but you know, Latter-day Saints, I'm very much on the outside, but just looking at it dispassionately, I can see, well, you know, there's a lot of things that don't line up with Christianity. Christianity was very much centered in the history, centered in the actions of a man, rather than some dubious and disprovable claims. So there's a bit of difference going on there. I think where the similarity comes is not on Jesus himself, but maybe some of his followers, especially once we start seeing them really getting into bed with the Roman Empire. For good or ill, that really marked the church in some very damaging ways that have lasted for millennia. There's some good that came out of it, but some things that just damaged it. When the message of a man that says, take up your cross, which is suffer to serve others for a better society that's more just and you know, takes care of the least of the people that you have around you, and turns it into, you better agree with me, otherwise I'm going to chop your head off with the sword. That sounds like not a Jesus problem, but a church leader problem. So that's where I would sort of draw the line there. I think Jesus is all right with me. Maybe some of his followers not so much.
I think Joseph Smith and Jesus had the same problem, that both are not been able to be proven to be true.
Oh, but Jesus didn't claim a whole bunch of stuff like Joseph Smith did. Joseph Smith said 2 angels visited him, gave him some tablets. He got some magical glasses, was able to translate it. And here's the book I translated. And you can look at the book and go, no,
it's no more crazy than the story of Jesus and Adam and Eve and talking donkeys.
See, that's the thing. Jesus didn't write about Adam and Eve or even talk about him at all.
No, I know, but you're claiming that you're talking as if everything in the Bible is provable, and yet bagging out Joseph Smith because what he did is not provable. There's no proof of
Peter,
those.
You asked about Jesus. So Jesus and we've got very little absolute provable evidence about the life of Jesus, except he was there and he sort of suffered and died. Then we've got the Christian teachings about Jesus, and then we've got the Bible, and what I hear you saying is a very modern Pentecostal evangelical fundamentalist reading of the Bible, and you're trying to lump that all into Jesus, where I'm saying actually those are all very different things.
No, fair enough, but that's often something that comes up about the modern Pentecostal.
Yeah, I agree with you there, Peter.
I don't think you're going to agree with what I'm about to say, because what I'm saying is that I think that's unfair to say that's what I grew up with and what I learned. So you're saying basically, unless I'm prepared to go back and study ancient Christianity, where it all came from. I mean,
probably all you would need to do is sit in an Anglican church for a year, a good Anglican church, and you'd be all right. You get a lot of what I talk about.
I've done that. I went to all sorts of churches and had church from our own church from home to avoid all of that crap.
No, you don't need to be
you can't just dismiss
sorry, go ahead.
I'm
talking over you again.
You can't just dismiss what I'm saying based upon the fact that a tiny percentage, from what I can gather so far, you and Luke have bothered to go back and look at and investigate and try and ascertain as to what the beginnings of the Christian church were, and everyone else after that, tough. You're just not going to know what really happened, and so all of your opinions are based upon some modern adaptation of a ancient story, and it's crazy. That doesn't help anyone understand anything about what's actually going on.
Yeah, no, see, I agree with you. But the question was about Jesus, and then suddenly you're conflating the entirety of fundamentalist Christianity on a question about Jesus. And I think they're two different questions, is what I'm saying. I think you can speak about Jesus in a very different way than saying, well, for instance, you threw in the story of Adam and Eve, and like that, those are completely unrelated things.
Yes, but I wasn't talking about Jesus. I was talking about the fact that both Jesus' story and Joseph Smith's story are unprovable. There's no evidence to support either. I think that's quite ironic that Joseph Smith made up a religion, made up a belief based upon something that also wasn't provable.
Plenty of evidence about the story of Jesus. It depends.
I'm
not talking about Jesus as a person, as the fact that he existed. I'm talking about Jesus as he's claimed to be the Son of God. That's what I'm talking about. That is not provable at all.
Yeah, sorry, I think we're starting to talk past each other. I think you're exactly
I know historically
right.
Jesus existed. There's tons of proof that yes, the character, the person, that Jesus existed, but there's no empirical evidence.
I'll let Luke speak in one moment. I'll just say this little piece, that I don't think you can convince or talk anybody into believing that Jesus is the Son of God. I think that is something that we talk about sort of in-house as a people are already committed to that. There's a whole lot of steps before you get to that point. And I'm going to use a story in the Bible. There's a whole lot of Jesus followers who actually didn't believe he was the Son of God until well after. I'm talking about 50, 100 years after. So there were people who were following Jesus, and according to Christian story, would say they had a life-giving encounter with him and didn't even know he was the Son of God. So, there's a whole bunch of stuff there. But I agree with you. There's no way that we can empirically go, Jesus is the Son of God. It's a talk about faith, and there is evidence, but it's not evidence in the empirical scientific sense that we study microbes and chemistry. It's more
I don't think I'm asking for that. I mean, I'm not asking for any scientific proof. I don't think science has anything to do with it at all. This is the circular argument we continue to have. Is that I'm more than happy to believe in what we're talking about with evidence, and I'm not happy to believe what we're talking about without it. That's as simple as I can be. If you can't present anything, all of our discussions about everything are based upon some degree of evidence, and this is the thing, of course, we're going to keep running into, where we can't go past it. And I guess that's a part of what we can try and uncover or discover in this discussion. But
no, I'm starting to really get a handle of the kind of question you're asking. But I don't know if Luke's got anything. I've got something brewing in the back of my mind.
Yeah, some quick thoughts, and I want to preface this with I am far and away no expert on Mormonism or Joseph Smith or a lot of the background of some of these, but I know bits. I know enough to be able to contribute to the conversation. And I think, for me as a Christian, I believe in the resurrection. So that's a pretty big distinction there. You don't see that with Joseph Smith or any of these other guys. But even if you didn't believe in the resurrection, okay, even if you weren't a believer, or if you said, well, that's not good enough, and there is this, it's a topic for another time, but there is evidence to suggest the truth of the resurrection. There's stuff there which I don't want to digress this conversation, but yeah, there is a reason I believe in that resurrection, put it this way, rather than just blind faith or because I was told that. But even if you take that out of the equation, I think the important note here is, again, similar to what Rich says, that Jesus, he wasn't trying to start a religion. He wasn't trying to lead an organization. In fact, throughout all of the Gospels, you see this common thread of his disciples, everyone expecting him to do that, everyone wanting him to do that, everyone asking him when he was going to do it, everyone's pushing him to do it, and him constantly pushing back on that and refusing to create a movement that he was leading from the front of that, particularly as a Messiah to overthrow the Romans or to lead a revolution against that, or to even to build this community of as a religious teacher where he was the guy. And I tell you what, in that community, if you were a rabbi, what we were talking about earlier about prestige and authority and respect and hierarchy, like that pales in comparison to what these guys the respect that they got. So if it was his intention to create and just to be the guy on top, even saying he was the Son of God, even all this sort of stuff, and to just create this organization, he could have done that comfortably without ruffling the Romans' feathers or the temple elite's feathers that actually got him killed. Instead, he had zero interest in that. He seemed to have zero interest in accumulating power of any sort or using the power that he had. Instead, he did all of the unexpected things. He didn't act in any way the way you would expect a religious leader to act, or the head of a movement to act. And then he caps it all off by actually going willingly to the cross and dying, which is historically a fact. That's even if you don't believe in the resurrection, virtually every scholar agrees that he went to the cross. And when you compare that with guys like Joseph Smith, it seems that their claims were effectively an attempt in order to gain and then consolidate the power and the status that would come by being the leader of these organizations. And that's exactly what happened. I see in these guys the way you would expect any human being to typically act in positions of power that we've always seen. We see it in empire, we see it in day-to-day stuff. That's what makes what Jesus did and his ministry and the way he went about it so unusual, confusing, perplexing, and ultimately life-giving, because there is something in that you go, that has to be true. That's the thing that undoes everything else, because it was so unexpected. And that is the only way to live out of love and mercy, by actually not grabbing hold of that. I don't see that with these other guys. So even if you say the claims were the same, or there's no evidence for either of them being a divine being or having a line with the big man in the sky, or whatever it is, however you want to phrase that, even if you take all of that out, the way that they conducted themselves is so different that I think it just takes all the credibility away from anything other than Jesus.
I wasn't trying to compare, by the way, Joseph Smith in any way, shape, or form to the character of Jesus. I was just saying how ironic it is that out of an unprovable existence as the Son of God, that Joseph Smith would pick something which was also unproven and make another unproven weird religion out of it and have a great deal of success with it, certainly on his level. So I think it's quite. And just quickly while I think of it, you mentioned you laughed at my intro about talking about sacrifice and blood sacrifice and not being a part of Christianity. Jesus was the ultimate example of what I'm talking about. God did not have to kill his son.
Yeah,
that was completely unnecessary.
100%. I agree 1000% with you. And and for me, that's one of the, when I hear that taught, and when people get this idea of penal substitution, that God killed Jesus as some form of sacrifice because that's what was needed to appease God's wrath, or to pay for the sins of mankind or whatever. Yeah, that is insane to me, and that is what I was taught as well.
I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad to hear that, because it's insane to everyone.
Yeah.
It never, and it's probably again a topic for another night, because it's an important one to go into. But I 100% agree with what you're saying, and why you would say that that it is a something built on sacrifice. But there are many other theories around what the cross accomplished that do not represent God, or that in a transaction type way. In fact, I think that's the most barbaric one, and it's the one that's the most impossible to reconcile with the God of love. That's like Jesus, diving in front of the oncoming bus that is an angry Father, an angry God, to protect us from Him. But guess what? When you die, you get to go up and spend eternity with that bus that was coming at you. I don't want that. That's crazy. There's all sorts of problems inherent in that.
But it also raises the question: if He was the Son of God, how could He be killed? And why did it take 3 days for Him to die? And why? Really, I mean, if God is all powerful, or is God and is capable, I mean, there's so many questions and holes in the whole story. But if you can't, as a believer, reconcile yourself to that story and try and understand why, are you prepared to say, well, maybe that's just not what happened? Doesn't fit with my sense of logic or my sense of what a father would do. Doesn't fit with anything. No matter how much I try, I can't make it fit. Is it worthwhile then going, well, maybe that's not what happened? Maybe the whole crucifixions, as we know, were commonplace. There's nothing strange about that. To do that to someone who was, alleged to be the Son of God, to do that as the ultimate humiliation for Jesus, for some sort of atonement. I mean, I never made it fit when I was a believer, and I sure as hell can't make it fit now. It just seems the most. But there are tons of things like that. God asking David to kill his son just to prove that He loved him, and I mean, wow.
Also,
we're going off on a tangent. I realise that, but we've probably run out of cult things to talk about. So why the hell not?
No, they're two great examples. And I mean, to go back with, if you're asking me, am I prepared to give up and understand the idea that it didn't happen, that God sent His Son to the cross, that God was the one that murdered Jesus, I've given that up. But I haven't given the cross up. Very much clearly Jesus went to the cross. However, there are so many other ways that you can look at that without looking at it as a father murdering his son for the benefit of mankind.
They're your words too, by the way, not mine. I didn't say God murdered His son. They're your words.
No, I know you didn't. But I think the reason I've said it in such a strong way is because we insulate ourselves from some of these harmful doctrines, because we don't want to actually extrapolate it out and think, well, what does it actually mean, this line of thinking? And that's where you end up, God murdering His son. It's child sacrifice all over again. Sure, it's for it saved the world and it needed to happen, and you kind of fill it with all of these, well, it's not that bad because it was only 3 days and He was back, and it's like, well, okay, well, how? It starts to fall apart.
Makes it worse.
It makes it worse, right? So then you go, but then the real question, and you touched on it before, and this is the question that actually solidified my faith more than anything, is if He was the Son of God, why would He go to the cross? So let's assume God didn't kill Jesus. It wasn't God murdering Him. It wasn't some weird transactional thing that God was like, hey, all these guys, they're all acting really bad, but if I get the special blood of my son, then that'll actually wipe it all out. No, if we get rid of all of that and we start to look at it and we go, why? Well, then you see someone who is God actually entering into the story, and rather than lifting a finger in power against His creation, instead willingly lets them murder Him in the ultimate expression of love, not just for His disciples or for the people that believed in Him or any of that sort of stuff, but for the people who are murdering Him, for everyone. This is It's the ultimate display of power by laying power down, and of mercy. And for me, it's the crowning definition of God's character. And it is in that moment for me that I have to go back and reread all of the scriptures through that moment. If this is a God who is prepared to go to the cross and allow these people to actually murder him in the most shameful, painful, and horrific way that humanity has ever devised, then that same God cannot be what this story over here is saying, whispering in David's ear. David, who was a murdering adulterer,
Not a nice person, man.
saying, I've actually just murdered your baby to pay you back for doing this or whatever. You just go, that didn't happen. That might be what they thought happened. Maybe infant mortality rate was probably very high in those days, and this baby died, and it was after a well-known public scandal, because David didn't hide anything, because he didn't need to, because he was the king. And you go, well, clearly God did that because God's not happy with his behavior. Or maybe some prophet or someone's come along and said that this is exactly what it is, what's happened. And that's been recorded. And then that all of a sudden one day ends up in this bundle of scriptures that we call the Bible. And that's why we cannot read it flat. That's why we have to look through it and go, that can't be this. That's not the same God that we see over here. It cannot.
Can I just add two things in that? You keep saying that Jesus was murdered. He wasn't murdered. He was crucified like all the other criminals because of what he did. So he wasn't murdered by anyone. It was actually, he seen to have been done something which required him to be punished by death with crucifixion. So he wasn't murdered by anyone. And also the cross. The cross is an interesting thing, which I'd love to talk about at another time. The cross is being utilized, and we go back to the cross. Jesus wasn't the only one who died on a cross. It was a commonplace among thieves and criminals, and yet for some reason that cross has been glorified into something which it's not. It's a tool to nail someone to kill them. So that's an interesting. But just want to jump into a point from my brother again. Go to bed, you silly old fart. What about what is it? Gautama is Buddha. Gautama is a Buddha, and Muhammad. Were these spiritual leaders as real as Jesus? Interesting question. Very interesting question. I mean, according to Islam, Muhammad, yeah, they would say the same. And Buddha, there's no question about whether Buddha was real as far as I'm aware.
Yeah, it's interesting. All three were, pretty much guaranteed to be historical characters. There was Buddha, there was a Muhammad, there was a Jesus running around. I guess for me, it raises an interesting question. And this is what I think, getting, or maybe even full circle to where we started about talking about cults. I think one of the marks of cults are unquestioning belief in the truths that are given you, like not I will explain the reasonableness of it and how it is a good thing, and how it's just like, this is what you believe, and if you don't believe it, we'll exert some pressure. And so they're real as Jesus. I guess the question for me is, I want to examine their teachings and for the content of their teachings and say, is this a good thing? Is this a thing that's going to lead to human flourishing? Is it going to do the thing that actually I want to be heading towards? Like, if I'm going to engage in spiritual leaders, I do want to, for me, I want to get closer to God. I want to become a better human. I want to love my neighbor and my family, and even Peter, in-laws. I want to love my in-laws better. If those teachings do not sort of give that life, then I want to start throwing some stuff out. So I think there's definitely, want to bring reason to it, which is a cult wants you to take the reason away. In fact, they start redefining terms like freedom. Peter, one of the things we're told in church was, it was for freedom that we've been set free. Therefore,
yes,
put all these chains on and give us your money. It seems like they don't cults and cult-like activity, they don't take the word freedom away. They redefine it to mean something almost the opposite. And so, I think Greg has hit on something really interesting there. And I would really encourage him: don't just swallow the stuff. Engage your mind, engage reason, engage your humanity in this thing. I think you may not come up with the same conclusions as I, but I think you'll have less chance of getting caught up into something if you can really question it all the way down.
One of the interesting points, Greg, about mentioning Buddha and Muhammad, something that is unique to both of those historical characters, is that they did not have a father who was, and I'm drawing the comparison, of course, between the God of the Old Testament, which, as we know, is about as horrific as you can get, with sacrifice, with murder, with everything you could possibly imagine a God wouldn't ordain or be a part of. The Jesus of the New Testament is what we're making a comparison. But what I'm suggesting is that Buddha and Muhammad aren't connected to any horrific God of the Old Testament. And I think that probably, I don't know, I'm not sure what that means, the impact of that.
Certainly, Eastern religions have got that distance, which I think maybe why a lot of disaffected Christians go east, because there's just so much baggage with the whole Judeo-Christian thing when you start digging into it. So going east is good. Muhammad is interesting because Muhammad is they would see themselves along the line of the Abrahamic religion, so the Jewish religion, then the Christian religion, and Muhammad came as the third prophet to sort of seal the book on the thing. So he's probably a whole bunch of thinking, a whole bunch of philosophy, even a region of the world removed from all of that. So even though he stands in that line, I can see he's got quite a few steps away from it than Christianity does as well. So yeah, interesting. I wish Suresh was here, because I think he'd bring a real good Eastern view on this thing. We're missing.
Look, it's the whole dilemma with the whole argument, of course, that the Quran is the final word, the last. That's it. There's no more. No one can say anything after this. This is the final word. It's really difficult to reconcile with the varying religions and the varying leaders and the claims. It just leads to a whole bunch of confusion and discussion and debates. And if it wasn't difficult, we wouldn't have this podcast.
We wouldn't have a podcast. Yeah.
So bring it on. Make it as hard as you like. Thanks, Greg, for that.
Good.
Hopefully you can join us next Wednesday. Luke, did you want to just add something quickly to what we've just discussing prior to that, about Muhammad and Buddha and stuff, or?
So prior to the question, or about
just
that?
Before? Yeah, about that, or whatever you want to talk about before, as we wrap it up.
I guess to wrap it up, we'll comment on that just briefly. I think it's important. They're a little bit different. There is overlap with Muhammad. Muhammad didn't claim to be God. It was, like Rich said, it was a prophet. So there is that difference there. And then there is overlap with the Old Testament, and there's that Abrahamic type faith. But I think, and even with Buddhism is confusing. It's not really a religion, Buddhism. It's more of a philosophy. And you ask a Buddhist, and they'll tell you that. And there's actually a lot of beautiful overlap. But there's, similar to what Rich was saying around how your belief functions. There are people with the belief in Islam. There are people who subscribe to Buddhism, that their belief functions in a way that is so beautiful, and that they actually do make the world around them a better place. And amen for that. I think we can get hung up on believing the right things, and I think what we believe is less important than how our belief functions. And if your belief is functioning in a way that is bringing life and beauty to the world around you, and is modeling that whole different way, then that is something to be, that's far more important, I think, than believing the right things. And my own theology sort of leads me into that space. And I know not every believer of Jesus is going to see it the same way, and that's okay. But for me, that's sort of how I'll say that. In terms of the I guess wrapping up the closing comments on cults, I just wanted to say that there are, the majority of churches are they're doing a great job, but it's important for us to actually have a bit of an idea and to look out for certain things. I think that you may not be in a cult, but there are behaviors or there are parts of the way things operate in that particular church that aren't helpful, that are harmful, and that are cult-like. So things like if someone leaves that church, you're not allowed to leave. But if you do leave, they're shunned, they're excommunicated. You do not go to their house for a barbecue. You do not reach out to them. They're done for. That is a red flag. Things like not being able to ask questions, like real questions, either of faith or of what's happening with the leadership or how things are operated. Another red flag. Things like having the Bible interpreted, cherry-picked in a way that exhibits significant control, anxiety, fear, in order to maintain either membership of that organization or a way of, this is what God thinks. This is exactly how it is, and there is no leeway. There is no humility or understanding that it's a diverse body of Christ, and there are other ways of looking at this. Anything that's afraid of that being fractured, so that it's controlled to such a degree, and the Bible is abused, all that sort of stuff. Again, another red flag. These are all things that I think it's important for us to look out for, because you don't need to be in those sort of spaces. And the thing that breaks my heart the most is when we wrap that up with Jesus, then when that inevitably causes harm and you end up having to walk away, a lot of people will walk away from the faith, full stop. They'll walk away from Jesus, full stop. And I'm not talking because, like yourself, Peter, who have questions that weren't answered and you want logical, rationale, and evidence and sort of stuff. That's okay. But what I'm talking about is people who attribute the hurt that they're receiving, from leaders who are abusing this situation, and they're saying that's what Jesus is like, that's what God is like, that's what this is all about. I want none of it. I don't blame them, but that breaks my heart that happens. So I think, it's important for leaders to start to identify this, to have the courage to do this, but also for people to kind of look for these sort of red flags. It's hard to do it when you're on the inside, but there are beautiful communities out there, and there are much, much more beautiful ways of doing it. And this is not what Jesus is like. Control is the opposite of love. So, if God is love, that's simple. It doesn't work. It's not from God.
Control isn't, yeah.
Hey, Peter, just as we finish, I'm going to put a link in our chat, because I know talking about this sort of stuff, people might be going, maybe I'm in a bit of a situation that I really need to look at. And, it's hard. I know firsthand when you're in that, often your family's in there, all your friends in there, your work is in there, like your whole world is there. So who are you going to go for help? And even if it's just to ask some questions or get an external perspective, one of the a person that I really recommend people, if they're needing a bit of help, is to look at somebody like this lady here. She's got a foundation. She's actually based in the US, but she's got a good perspective, because she's a psychologist. She's an expert on the cults. She was actually in a cult when she was younger, got out. Yep. She knows firsthand what it is to sort of put yourself back together after those things. So if you need help, reach out, get some professional help. And
it's good.
And what I'll also say is, from my perspective, because I was in cult-like churches, a couple of them. One of them, when I left, the pastor to my face said, if you walk out that door, you'll never serve God again. You're done. Like, your whole faith is done. And this is a church of 50 people. So, like, imagine how small that that particular view of a big God is. But when I left, all of my the people in the church were holding special prayer meetings for me because I was demon possessed for leaving the church.
Of course you were.
The other church, to my face, the pastor said, if you leave, you'll be leaving the safety of this church, and horrible things were going to happen to you and your children. If you're in those kinds of situations, you don't need to examine doctrines or beliefs. You need to get out of there.
Yeah, amen.
Find expert help. Find some people that will hold you safe, and like me, you'll be all right. You might end up in a place that's like Peter, where you're just like, I don't want any part of it. Perfectly fine. You might be like me. You're still in it, but you're okay again. No matter what. Don't worry about what the Bible says or is this doctrine right. Just get out of those places.
Yeah.
Because it's not about
you might recall.
It's about safety for yourself. So
Absolutely.
you want to be good. So if you've got questions about that, go look at the experts. Don't listen to us too deeply. We know we've got some opinions, we've got some experiences, but go to the experts like this lady, get some good advice. They put you in touch with some experts that will really be able to help you. So
good stuff.
I thought that would be
you might recall my experience with Shiloh Faith Centre in Balga back in the day, where I was told by the pastor when I decided to leave, he said, "You can't." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Because you're a part of our flock." And I went, "You can just flock right off, mate." And I got the hell out of there. And so I really appreciate what you said.
That's what you need to do.
That's right. The address is on there. One of the modern churches, which with a great deal of entertainment when it comes to cult, like I guess, I don't know what we'd call it, their normal way of life, was Westboro Baptist Church. I mean, that's a classic example of the most disgusting modern cult. Like, if you've never seen Westboro Baptist Church and you want some entertainment, go onto YouTube and put it in. You'll find it. It's interesting that, look, we talked tonight about a whole bunch of different religions. There's beautiful religions that you can actually, if you have to encompass the incredible baggage that often comes with Judeo-Christian, as Rich said, like Jainism and Hinduism and Buddha. I mean, you can, if you want to worship someone or something, I mean, there are so many alternatives. I find them so much more peaceful and peace-loving and less complicated. I mean, what's less complicated than Jainism, for goodness sake? I mean, if you love insects and all sorts of bugs and don't want to step on them, have a look at Jainism and see what
exactly
it can tell you. I hope this podcast has been helpful. If you're worried about cults, there are plenty of them around. They are very, very clever. They're great at conning people into getting involved, and there's always an ulterior motive by whoever's running it. I find the same way. Look a little bit with Potter's House, of course. They're very much like that. Just if someone's saying anything that makes you feel uncomfortable and your alarm bells are going off, sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Get out, go away from them, have a look at what's going on. The Scientologists will stop you in the city somewhere and try and suck you into what they're doing. The safest mechanism to cults and all that kind of thing is just go your own way. Just find your own path. You don't need to be associated with any kind of religious group. You really don't. I'm proof of that. I'm much happier now since I got out of it. And if you need to talk more about that, then we'll be back next Wednesday, which, of course, is the 6th of February. Can you believe it? We're
6th of March.
It's just ridiculous. Wow. 6th of March is the next Wednesday night. Suresh will be back with us. We don't know what we're going to talk about. If you've got a suggestion of what you'd like us to talk about, that'd be fabulous. Just hit us up on this link. Or on Facebook. You can find us on Facebook, YouTube, of course, also Spotify, TikTok, and Instagram. That's the one. Wow, we've gone way over time. It's nearly 10 o'clock. Time flies when you're having fun. Thanks, guys.
Man. Good
to chat again. We look forward to doing it 8 o'clock Australian Western Standard Time from beautiful Perth in Western Australia. Au revoir. Talk to you then, guys. Cheers.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Luke.
See you, gentlemen.